I'm here this afternoon with Sakuntala Rao. We've just come off the stage here in Singapore, Shared Service and Outsourcing Week Asia 2011. We've been here before, Saku, you and I.
That's true.
Interesting debate today. First time that we've had an industry insider chairing the debate, which I felt made a big difference up there today. But you
I
tell
agree,
me,
yes.
You've been in the hot seat. What was the biggest difference for you today, do you think, in terms of the conversation, how that worked?
Yeah, I think because Deborah knows the industry and knew the questions to ask, and also the other thing today, and I've been here twice before, is that I think on the panel we've got to know each other a little more, so we knew what some of the viewpoints were, what some of the hot topics were. So I think it was a very interesting debate. I enjoyed it very much.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Some new faces as well.
Yeah, that's right.
And some traditional old faces that we've seen voted into this panel here in Asia before, not present today.
That's true.
Some notable absences of people who hadn't made the shortlist and those that had.
Right.
From your perspective, from a mixture of providers versus consultants up there, how do you think that worked today?
I think there were a few more providers today than there have been in the past. In the previous two times I think I was there, maybe providers were outnumbered by consultants. I think now it was a little more even, and we also had ex-advisors, etc. So I think the mixture was better.
I definitely think it was interesting that some of the comments from the audience were relevant in terms of outsourcing comments that had been made last year. People had remembered.
That's true.
For example,
that's good to know.
It is good, absolutely.
Yeah.
And one of the things that they picked up on was the panel's view of the hybrid, which I think certainly in some cases has slightly changed from 12 months ago. And I mean, you talked about nuances of hybrid.
That's right.
Which I think obviously is an evolving topic. Clearly the market is becoming more responsive now to the hybrid model, but you're seeing various different sorts of hybrid. Let's talk about what you're seeing in terms of trends. What are the different types that you're now aware of, and what sort of patterns can you link between those models? Okay.
So, especially in this market, the Asia-Pacific market, it's been a little behind the curve, compared to the US or Western Europe in terms of outsourcing. And, at this point in time, we see that the market is looking to, providers to look at hybrid models. And when I talked about these nuances of hybrid, there are various ways of doing the hybrid models. So one is, of course, part of the scope gets outsourced, part of the scope is in a captive center or in centers of excellence, which are in-house. So that's a nuance of hybrid. The other is, it's something called managed services, wherein you have, the people potentially would be, owned by the client themselves, and they may provide the premises, they may provide some of the IT. What the provider will then bring in is, tools, methods, expertise, maybe, some amount of the operational management. So that's another version of hybrid. The third version of hybrid could be that, you have a joint venture. These are for very large number of people. A joint venture is set up specifically for hybrid, and this has been done in the public sector, sometimes between the provider and the public sector, and the joint venture is created, and that's a version of hybrid. Another version of hybrid could be that, the provider brings in, the people as well as the premises and, the tools, the methods, etc., etc. But, the client, and this is particularly sometimes for banks, have people, along with the provider. So, they actually look at some elements of compliance, are there to monitor or to provide guidance or to provide linkages back to the retained organization. So that's one version of the hybrid. Then we're also seeing, some of these, and we talked a lot about innovation today as well. And, we're also seeing more a joint working towards some of the goals that the organization has, working with the provider to see, how to improve the entire cycle of, say, order to cash or procure to pay, which, it doesn't matter whether some part of it is in a captive, some part of it is, outsourced, and some parts of it may be still in the retained, business itself. But how the projects are driven across that. So that's a nuance of hybrid. So there are, I think, a lot of nuances. That's why I don't think it's now a black and white of outsource, retain. It could be a lot of nuances in between.
Well, that's 5 models
to
run us through there. And I dare say there are probably more, and it will continue to evolve.
Yes.
I think the question probably for our audience is, where would you begin in terms of working out where you're most likely to fit? Is there a trend? Is this about verticalization? You mentioned banks, for example, being more prone to one certain nuance of hybrid. What are you seeing from your client demand? Can you fit people neatly into each of these different buckets based on their sector or their size of organization? Or is it simply down to culture and some of the other softer things that you mentioned today?
I think, I think it's largely down to culture, of a particular organization, because some organizations are uncomfortable in their perceived loss of control if they give away their entire back office to another, company. So I think it's all down to culture at the end of the day as to where they want to, fit in. And it's also, one of the panelists mentioned this today. I think it's also a journey. It's not that, you decide today and that's the end. So, it can continue to evolve. It can start with a hybrid. It can become a full outsourcing. It can start with a outsourcing. You can also have a build, operate, transfer model where you have a outsourcer come in and build it for you, operate for some time and transfer back. So that is the reverse, part of, an outsourcing. So, and I don't think it's...
What's the trend, Saku? Does somebody toe dip? Is it an exercise where they test out one nuance, see whether it fits, try it on for size, and if not, potentially it evolves into something else? Or do people get it right first time?
Again, not all people get it right the first time. Some people do, of course. They have a very clear vision in the organization. And I've seen some of the companies here wherein they look at this as a strategic exercise that they are doing. They have an extremely clear vision of what they want out of the shared services and how to get there. They also have an extremely clear vision of their own culture and whether they believe that, their culture is comfortable with buy versus make. And so I've seen a lot of companies do this, and wherein they're very clear that we want to have potentially a hybrid, and they will say we will provide the premises as an example, and we want you to come in and do the rest for us, do it for 5 years, transfer it back to us at the end. They are extremely clear. So other companies maybe haven't thought it through enough. And, so that's when they are, kind of waffling. They're not quite sure what they want. They sometimes, change their scope or whatever midway. That's where, a good advisor would actually help in moderating the entire process.
And you talked a bit today about matching what the market is looking for in terms of services that are provided, which I thought was really interesting because that was your response to the audience's question about why potentially some of the views on hybrid as an option had changed. Do you think that's your role as a provider in the market? Do you think your job is to listen to what does the market need and tailor your products to that? Or is your role, do you think, to be the more learned of the two and to offer an approach that perhaps maybe or maybe not what the market is looking for?
Right. So I think, let's step back, and this is not just in the outsourcing industry. Look at it in any industry, right? So what do you want to do in an industry is you want to do two things. One is you want to make the market. So that's where you are the learner and you want to make the market. So that's one part of it. The second part of it is also obviously you have, ultimately what do you want to do? You want to fulfill the needs of your customers. And if you find a certain section of your customers are, not comfortable going the whole hog initially and, are more comfortable, say, with hybrids, you would also tailor your products in order to meet your market demand. So I think it's a question of both. So I think, that's why the industry is evolving. And, you will find a lot of things that the industry is now doing, which, we weren't doing earlier.
Even if that puts you in a situation where perhaps your decision is based around what the customer thinks is best rather than what you perhaps think is best, as is the case where Ashish mentioned he is not a fan of hybrids, but if the customer wants to talk about one, he will. What's your view on that in terms of whether or not providers should be able to compromise on what they think is right based on what the customer thinks is right?
So, I mean, is it a question of compromise? Because ultimately, what are you trying to do? You're trying to see that the customer gets a return on his investment, right? That he meets his, that creation of the shared services actually fulfills whatever goals he wants it to fulfill, whether it is cost reduction, whether it is process improvement, whether it's standardization, whether it's maybe creating an asset which he can use in mergers and acquisitions to integrate his acquisitions more quickly. So, whatever he's actually looking for.
Outcomes.
It is about outcomes. So then, this thing is just a vehicle. So sometimes I think we get caught up so much in this debate of outsourcing and, etc. That's a make versus buy. So it is, ultimately it's only a vehicle. So what is your transformation journey and what are the objectives of the journey and how do you want to fulfill it? And I think that's where the provider and the customer, if they have that common goal, it doesn't really matter,
Sounds very sensible. Wise words from you today here, Saku. Let's think about the common goal and the objective at the end and not get too caught up in the semantics of this.
Yes.
It's been a pleasure to have you here again. Thank
Pleasure's
you.
mine.
I
Thank
wish
you.
you well for being voted in again next year. Fingers crossed. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you.